on this computer. Alrighty, so welcome to the first of several Darton Scholars and Artisans of Darton discussions. Our first inaugural artisan and scholar is Mr. William de Wyke, Laurel, Master William de Wyke, Laurel. And he has kindly agreed to answer some questions and be a guinea pig while I figure out how to do all this stuff. So let's get into it. So first question, are you ready?
Is it worth explaining a little bit about who I am?
Yes.
And what
First
I do?
question, who are you? Why did I invite you here?
I'm William de Wyke. I was elevated for shoemaking almost exactly 10 years ago. I've been in the society for about 21 years-ish, on the periphery of it for quite a lot longer than that. And I dabble in other things, but mostly I'm known for shoes and leather and things like that.
Cool. You also, in the advert, which I don't have in front of me, you said you also do things like mousetraps and sheaths and tent making.
I've fallen down numerous rabbit holes in my life.
I like to encourage this. This is one of
I have very little resistance against rabbit holes. I need to do more mousetraps, actually. I haven't done any for a long time, but a number of years ago, I was looking at the Merode altarpiece, which is my favorite painting of the period. And on one wing of it, there is Joseph in his carpenter's workshop making a foot warmer. And he has mousetraps on his table. And a chap whose name escapes me now wrote a paper on the allegory inherent in these mousetraps and the meaning and so on, and explained the different types and what they were, and I completely fell down this rabbit hole and ended up rebuilding or recreating a number of them. And I never quite had the heart to test them because they're not as clean and efficient as modern ones, but they definitely work. And I taught a class on this with a little stuffed toy mouse called Sebastian, because Sebastian is the patron saint of slow learners. And this poor thing fell into multiple traps. And that got me onto a book that was written about trapping and hunting in period, which I have a facsimile copy of and need to build more of the traps out of. And some of them are incredibly gruesome, and some of them are just incredibly fun. There's this gigantic sort of crossbow powered thing that is for stoats and weasels and things of that sort of size. And I really want to build one of those. But, yeah.
So
yeah, I've made a couple of tents, and I sew occasionally and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Many cool things. All right, okay, so let's get on with my standard questions that may or may not get edited with each different artisan and scholar. First one is, what drew you to your art?
A need for footwear, ultimately. I outsourced my first set of clothes when I first joined the society and needed shoes, and there was nobody to outsource shoes to, and Llewellyn, who's a good friend of mine, had made some shoes, and I kind of thought, how hard can it be? And looked through shoes and patterns and picked a very basic pattern and made some, and they were mostly terrible. And I'm actually really sad I don't have them anymore. I don't know what happened to them.
Yeah.
But they worked well enough. I kind of got bit by that bug at that point, because they hadn't worked properly, and so I wanted to make some that did work properly.
Hence the rabbit holes.
And unlike fabric, which I don't particularly enjoy working with, leather mostly stays where you put it and doesn't sort of flop around all over the place.
Yes, that is the thing with sewing and fabric, is you do need to swear at it occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Wow. Okay. Yeah, so need. I mean, that's a very pressing thing. I'm sure there's been multiple things I've learned to do because I wanted it and I couldn't afford it or couldn't get it easily, and particularly in the pre-internet days and pre-online shopping, easily accessible, push of a button, as regular as they are now. Yeah. So was making shoes something you expected to like?
No, and I didn't like it the first time I did it.
Yeah.
It was literally painful because I was doing it wrong and using the wrong tools and the wrong materials and so on. But it grew on me, and I enjoyed making the second pair. They were up till 3 AM the night before the event job, but I got them done.
Having fun in the meantime, anyway.
Yeah, and yeah, it kind of the process of getting better kind of stuck with me, and it was a thing that I could do that was portable and expensive in material, but didn't require a lot of tooling and space and so on. So it fit fairly well with where I was at the time. Cool.
So no, it was not, but it became one. That's cool.
Yeah.
What keeps you interested in it?
I'm a giant nerd. I got to a point where I had learned enough to realize that there was this vast amount that I didn't know and wanted to know more. And that was the slippery slope. And learning technique and figuring out things that where I was at the time hadn't been figured out locally to me. And so it was somewhere where I could build on the knowledge that other people had shared. And yeah, that process of figuring things out was really neat. And then just learning about more and more about how shoes work and how they fit and how they were made and the industry around them.
Oh yeah, that would be quite.
Was really interesting, and I've, that has extended to post-medieval shoes, and yeah, it's something I'm still interested in, even though I don't do a lot of making these days.
Yeah. Oh. What surprised you about it? Anything that surprised you?
I think the biggest surprise for me, well, initially it was that this is really time consuming. They're not big things, but the first couple I made took a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest surprises for me was how much faster the whole process is when you have the right tools.
Mm.
And the right tools are the ones that you see medieval shoemakers using in art and sculpture. And the ability to hold the piece while you're working on it and have both hands free, and the ability to pull a thread, a stitch tight without the thread cutting into your hands, and not having to fight with needles and so on. And that, I mean, once I got the hang of that, it was slow to begin with, but it halved the amount of time initially that it was taking me to make a pair of shoes. And it kept going down from there. And that was, in retrospect, it shouldn't have been surprising. I mean, you know, you look at
any skills get faster with
Artisans, it's like, oh my God, the things they did actually worked, you know.
Like they had brains.
Yeah.
Thought about things.
But, and from there, it was actually, it kind of became surprising that nobody around me had figured this out already. Because, you know, there were still people fighting with saddler's needles and the wrong kind of thread and things. Yeah, sharing that was a lot of fun.
Cool. What would you say, I mean, if you feel like an answer to a question may be better answered by another thing you've done, you can switch to tent making or whatever. But what is the most useful skill you've learned?
Probably a general idea of how to fix things that are made out of leather, in terms of overall utility, but in other ways, patience and the acceptance of getting things wrong. There's a lot of, for me, there was a lot of failure. And one of the things that I did after I made a pair of shoes that had an awful lot wrong with them was to break that down and try and contain the failure into practice pieces. And break down techniques to their individual components and practice those, and then put them back together again in the process of making a shoe. And yeah, that approach was useful. I'm absolutely terrible at planning things. I can't do it unless I've got the thing in my hand. And so when you're making something as time-consuming and comparatively expensive as shoes, that's not a great way to go, because you end up making a lot of very expensive, time-consuming mistakes. So breaking that up into smaller things was a big deal.
Yeah. Certainly the old adage of, you know, the elephant one bite at a time. You got to break it down. Yeah.
Make lots of tiny elephants. Eat those.
Yes, little bits of leather. Elephant leather, yes. Right, what was that actually? Okay, well, it kind of segues on from this quite nicely. What was the hardest or most challenging thing?
Fitting. Always is with shoes.
They're weird, aren't they?
Making shoes is easy. Pretty much anybody with a basic level of manual competence can make a pair of shoes. Making shoes that fit is hard. And it really does take a lifetime study. I am not good at it yet. I've got a way of approaching the problem that mostly works for the kind of shoes that I make. But it is really complicated. And feet are dynamic and they change shape a lot when you walk. And really subtle differences can make them very uncomfortable. So that is, fitting is by far the hardest part. It technically, the next hardest part for me actually is organization. Because as soon as you start making shoes for other people, you end up with cardboard and measurements scrolled on them and tapes made up and bits of pattern, and I'm appallingly bad for organizing or failing to organize those and then losing them, and not having the pattern pieces that I used and things like that.
Yeah. Has your shoemaking or anything else you've done helped with, in the SCA, helped with another art form, whether Scadian or mundane?
I don't really practice any mundane art forms, so but yeah, I mean it taught me a lot about working with leather, and I mean learning a lot about the material is an important part of the whole process, because you know, leather isn't a thing any more than fabric is a thing. You know, there's as many varieties and of completely different material that all fall under the realm of leather,
or with their own properties. And
yeah, and so I've made, you know, other leather things. I haven't particularly branched past that in terms of transferable skills that I picked up from shoemaking, but you know, sheaths and scabbards and cases and purses and things like that.
It's all leatherworking.
All leatherworking. And it's all fairly transferable skills once you've got the basics down.
I'd imagine so. Okay, we get into some slightly different questions that I crowdsourced, general questions. You're stuck on a desert island or an artistic retreat of one, i.e. you can't borrow from anybody else. What 5 tools are you taking with you? You can, if you have them, you can share them to us.
A sharp knife, a good awl, a ruler, a pair of dividers, and something to sharpen the knife with. And with that, you can make shoes, or in fact, a whole lot of other things.
Plus, of course, leather and thread. And
leather and thread and wax and all of those things. Yeah.
Are not tools, they're materials.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so those are the 5 things. What is the best non-standard tool you've found?
Thumbnails. They're actually kind of standard. They are the best line marking tool for a lot of medieval leatherwork. If you need to mark a stitch line or whatever, you can get very used to the way that you hold your thumb and generating a straight line down an edge or whatever. Other than that, I don't really use anything that would be considered wildly non-standard by a medieval shoemaker. The tools are very basic. And I haven't needed to, you know, build anything particular. I mean, bits of bone are very common shoemaking tools. I've made a few things out of that, but I don't really have any.
So the oldie fingernail.
Yep.
Standard William Wyke, half thumbnail width or something.
There were, you know, when shoemakers got in fights, they they go around to some rival shop and cut their thumbnails off. That's quite a post-period thing, but there's written evidence of that, of 18th century shoemakers.
I mean, I've heard of harpists getting their nails cut short and things like that, but nails, huh?
That amused me.
All right, okay. Do you have any guilty pleasures or dirty hacks?
Glue. My hands don't work anymore, so making shoes in an entirely period way is largely beyond me now. And so I sat down and worked out how to make, how to fake it, basically, and make modernly glued up shoes that look possibly like turn shoes until you look at the sole.
You don't look at the sole.
And Dacron thread. Good single strand linen is almost impossible to find now. And the antique stuff that I've got has become too rotten to use. And
is that when my project comes into it, perhaps at some point? Is that when my project with linen comes in at some point? Possibly,
yeah.
I can have a surplus that we can.
Yeah.
The leather workers. Yep.
So Dacron, it can be made to work just like linen, and you can put a bristle on it just like you do with a linen thread. And if you get the right colored stuff, it's visually indistinguishable. So that's something that if I was making shoes, or pretty much anything actually these days that was going to get used long term, I'd use that, not linen, because it just lasts forever.
Yeah, and leather, if treated well, will last for a long time as well.
Yeah, if you don't screw up the dye.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. This question I had was an advice question, and I had a question that was similar from a audience member. So Alex, do you mind if I read your questions out now, or would you prefer to do it yourself?
Go for it.
All right. Okay. So Alex's question is for newbies. What sort of leatherwork things is it reasonable to expect to do as a non-specialist in leatherwork who doesn't plan to become a specialist? And what gear do they want? Is it punching holes in belts, patching things, adding fitting to straps? What's a reasonable non-specialist thing to be able to do?
Almost anything that doesn't rely on sewing it.
Yeah.
Sewing leather is a skill unto itself. But leather is easy to cut in basic ways. It's easy to make straps and belts, and it's pretty easy to learn how to, mount belt mounts, especially if you've got a couple to practice with. And everybody who's got anything made of leather should really own a hole punch. They're pretty hard to find with. So yeah, I mean, basic strap work is extremely easy, and yeah, anything that doesn't really need a lot of sewing.
So something to cut with, hole punch, something to measure.
Sharp knife, ruler, dividers, hole punch.
Yeah.
Is as much as you really need. If you're not going to be sewing things, some way of setting rivets. I have a abiding hatred of two-piece jiffy rivets, but they work mostly, and the ability to do basically rivet things together is quite useful.
Yeah. Cool. And then the follow on from that one is, what's the next level up of being able to do a bit more and maybe make something useful?
Really at that point, learning how to sew. So you need an awl, and you need, depending on what you're sewing and how, you either need needles of the right type or bristles of some kind, and without falling, too deep into the rabbit hole, some wax. And the biggest mistake people make at that point really is getting the wrong kind of awl. The thing that I see a lot of people do is they go to a haberdashery shop or something and they go, I need an awl, and they get a scratch awl, which is a marking tool, not a tool for punching holes and things. And even a new saddler's awl, they need quite a lot of work when you get them. They need to be sharpened and polished and so on. But you can go a really long way with very basic stuff. And there's a lot of information now on the internet. There's a lot of crap on the internet as well, unfortunately, and telling them apart is quite hard.
Yeah. Run it past your friendly local artisan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Al Stohlman literally wrote the book on hand sewing leather. And it's pretty cheap and easy to get.
Maybe if you send me a link to that, I can put a link in YouTube, things like that. What was the name of that person again?
Al Stohlman.
Al Stohlman, the book. Cool. All right. Does that answer your question, Alex? Hopefully it does.
That'll do just fine. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. What helps if you are stuck with ideas?
That's a really hard question for me to answer, because I don't do art. I am not an artist. I'm an artisan. And so I'm not doing the kind of creative work that is subject to artistic block, running out of ideas. I mean, there are far more interesting extant items that I would love to try and reconstruct than I will ever have time to work on. And so it's just not a thing that I run into. I don't get stuck for ideas. For me, the problem is getting halfway through and then getting distracted by the next thing before I finish the first one. And having this enormous pile of kind of half-finished UFOs, lying around that I'm probably never going to get back to.
Oh, there we go. Cool. I've seen that there. Excellent. Yes, the UFO pile, and sometimes the naughty corner.
Sometimes the naughty corner. Yeah, I've got a few things in that, and sometimes I part way through building something, go, right, I've figured out how this works, and then I lose interest.
So if you want you to make something for them, if someone wants you to make something for them, they have to make it really difficult and really tricky and interesting and complicated, and you finish it.
Mostly it needs to be interesting, but I need to not make things for other people these days.
Teach them how to make it themselves, and they'll have shoes for a lifetime. Yep. All right. So what medieval item gives you joy, delights, and you wish people would pay more attention to?
Ooh. There are many. I mean, the simple answer there is shoes, actually, because they're a very often neglected part of people's outfits. And they are, in a lot of places, subject to quite rapid fashion change, particularly in the later Middle Ages. But casework, leather casework, would be one that it's one of the things that was very common in period that's quite uncommon in reenactment, because there hasn't been a lot of published information on it until last year.
Can you give a description of what that actually is?
Small boxes, basically, made out of leather. I mean, ranging from everything from simple little comb cases up to very elaborate tooled cases for books. You get rough cases that are amazing. And lots of little things where if you had something small that was fragile and needed to be protected, it would go in a leather case.
Yeah.
You know, they varied, but were often tooled in some way, decorated or painted or whatever. And they're not common now in reenactment circles at all. Hopefully the book that Marquita Vulcan published last year will slowly change that.
Because they sound like they'd be useful.
They are. They're not completely trivial to make a lot of the time. There is an art to it, and I mean, it's a craft in its own right. Yeah, those and mousetraps. Yeah.
Which are just cases for mice.
Kind of temporary ones, yes.
Okay, cool. Are there any common misconceptions about leatherwork and shoemaking?
Oh, so many.
What are some common ones?
People who make shoes are not cobblers, for a start. They're cordwainers. Cobblers fix shoes. And specifically, cobblers work in old leather. Cordwainers work in new leather. And they were separate guilds, and they were very much prohibited from dabbling in each other's territory. There were left and right shoes in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
There's a very widespread misconception that they didn't invent left and right shoes until the 19th century. And it's complete bollocks. There was very definitely left and right shoes for pretty much the entire recorded history of shoes until the late 15th century, when they started making them symmetrical and straight. And that was a style thing. They were very wedge shaped. But that habit of making them on symmetrical lasts persisted through the 16th, 17th century. I don't know why. I haven't seen any good reasoning for it, or even any good hypothesis for it, because they were still using pairs of lasts. They weren't like using lasts one at a time. They still had them in pairs and so on. And that's a thing that people go, oh, look, in the 18th century, shoes were not left, they weren't made as left and right. Therefore, for the entirety of recorded history before that, it must have been that way.
Yeah, it's more of an anomaly than a...
Yeah, and it's kind of a strange one.
Only real discoveries are the one we've made recently, right?
Yeah, they're the only things that count.
Yes.
The idea that people made their own at home, that hasn't been broadly true in Europe since pre-Roman times.
Yeah.
Shoemaking has always, has been an industry for as long as we have evidence for industry of pretty much any kind. There probably were people making extremely basic foot coverings, but even extremely poor people had shoes.
Yeah.
You had to be really, at the extreme end of poverty to not have something on your feet. And that would probably be, nth hand, mostly worn out, whatever scrap from the cobbler, but you'd have something. And it's it's an art in its own right. I mean, it's a complex craft that was systematic and regulated while there was a guild structure, and it was very systematic, and it was a big industry. We don't have good medieval records, but you know, shoes would last a farm working peasant about 6 months. And in early colonial US, where they started having records, one master and a collection of apprentices could keep up with about 60 people. And so it was, shoemaking was the second most populous craft after farming in pre-modern places where we have records.
Yeah. Shoes have never lasted forever, have they?
No.
I'm lucky with my pair of docks that lasted 20 years with sporadic wear.
They don't make them like they used to.
Nope. All right, apparently not like they did before that either. Okay, so what would you say is the best idea you're working on, and why?
I can't really answer that because I'm not really working on anything at the moment. For people that are watching this who don't know me, I have a neurological injury, and my hands don't really work properly anymore. I haven't for some time. So I don't have either the dexterity or the strength to do much of anything making wise, and particularly not shoemaking. I'm intermittently pursuing making sort of more machine-made shoes. So, you know, look kind of like this, but they have a machine-sewn sole, and they're mostly glued. But even that is tricky at the moment. Yeah, I'm not really actively working on much at all.
You have ideas occasionally though, or?
I've got a lot of things I want to do.
If you weren't cursing your hands.
Yeah. There's one of the longest standing of those is making proper 15th century riding boots, which I've never seen recreated properly outside of really hardcore European living history geeks. And they're very non-obvious in the way they go together. But they look dead sexy when they're on, because they're basically a spray fit when you're wearing them. But that one is stuck behind getting the right kind of leather. That's you need a very particular kind of leather that's tanned in the right way, and it's inordinately expensive. So, you know, it's a sort of a $1,200 a pair material cost before you've even started investing any time in it. So
you need a mad tanner as well.
Yeah, I know a couple in Europe actually, and yeah, I need to consider whether that's a possible project for long term.
Yes. All right. And what art excites you now, or what artisanal stuff excites you now?
Lots of things still. Various things peripheral to swords, scabbard making, grips, the various ways they were done. There's a lot of things I'm interested in that I dive into a little bit, and hit I want to start making experimental ones of these and then kind of stop because I can't. But yeah, trying to figure out scabbard making and bits of woodwork and things. The eternal question of the interior structure around tents. I think Will McLean probably got the closest to right before he died on that, but I really want to build one for myself. I actually want to get lots of people interested in building round pavilions, because then we can make corridors and join them all together, like the Field of Cloth of Gold tents, do crazy things like that.
Could be fun.
Yeah.
All right, that looks like we have exhausted the list of questions. So
Helen has her hand up.
who has her hand up?
Helen.
Helen has her hand up. Well, that's because I can't see Helen because I'm recording. Helen,
I think so.
turn video on, or you want to type something in the chat?
Or is that just my stupid Zoom cursor? No, that's just my stupid Zoom cursor.
Okay. So if anyone has a question, either type it in the chat or turn your camera on and your audio on and let us have it. Meanwhile, I'm going to look at these things and think, I think you need a minion then in that case, someone who's willing to be your hands.
I do. Well, I do have a couple of things to kind of hold up to the camera.
Cool.
I don't have my first pair, but this is one of my second pair of shoes that I finished at 3 a.m. the night before 12th night in Caid, which was the first SCA event outside of New Zealand that I'd ever been to. And I had great expectations of it, and I was one of 2 people, I think, at the whole event wearing period shoes. So a bit of disillusionment set in there. Completely screwed up the fit and walked through the heel because it collapsed because I got this wrong, and then there was no heel stiffener. But I've managed to keep these ones, and they're reasonably tidily made. But yeah, patterning didn't go according to plan. These ones excite me. These are 13 or 14 years old now, these shoes. There's a couple of interesting things about these. One is what happens when you put iron dye on veg tan leather without adding enough tannin, is it destroys the grain surface of the leather and it flakes and peels off.
Really?
But the best thing about these, thing I really love about these, is that they've worn out exactly the way that extant medieval shoes wear out. And that made me really, really happy when that happened. Despite being made of slightly different material, they've behaved very much as medieval shoes did. And these were the first pair I made after I had spent a lot of time doing specific technique practice.
As you mean.
And they fit really well, and they lasted really well. And they wore out just like the extant ones, which was fun. Sometimes I make them and they don't fit. So I cut them in half so you can see the inside. This was a thing that this proved to be incredibly useful as a teaching tool, actually, because this is what a turned shoe looks like after it's been turned. And this was one of a pair I made that were never going to fit the foot that they were made for. But they were made reasonably nicely, so they turned into quite good teaching tools. And this is the same thing that happened, only with a non-turned Renaissance style. Again, this is several years old, so it's gotten a bit distorted over time, but that's the inside of an attempt at a copy of a shoe from the SO1 shipwreck from the Netherlands in 1590. And it went together all right, but it was never going to fit. So yeah, and having a knife that can cut a whole shoe in half like that is quite fun.
Was it a one go, or is it a?
Yeah, that was one go.
That would be very
big
satisfying.
half round knife.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Not seeing any hands up on Dylan's side. Either they're very shy or there are no questions.
Oh, there's a hand up.
There's a hand up. Who's Lewin?
So a loaded question for people who know you, and probably everyone who doesn't will wonder how we ask this. How did a fascination with shoemaking wind up with the largest collection of sewing machines in captivity in the Western world?
I've cut down a lot.
You gave them away.
I only have about 35 at the moment. Because my hands started to go defective, and I started looking at mechanized ways of making shoes. I'm also an inveterate mechanical tinkerer. I have been literally my whole life. I love taking things to pieces and figuring out how they work. Occasionally I get them back together again. And I worked out that sewing machines were a thing that were interesting. And actually the history of sewing machines got really interesting to me as well. So you know, it was just another rabbit hole that I fell down, and then I came across a bunch of antique ones and collected those for a while. I've mostly gotten rid of them now. Yeah, but yeah, looking for mechanized ways of making shoes, of which there aren't really any good ones when you're making medieval shoes.
Because medieval.
Tell us about trinkets.
Yes. A question from Alex for the video record.
Not sure where mine is at the moment. I would hold it up otherwise. Trinkets are the emblematic knife of a shoemaker.
This is trinket spelled T-R-E-N-K-E-T-S, not a trinket, a trinket.
Yes, trinket. Trinket is also actually the collective noun for shoemakers.
A trinket of shoemakers.
A trinket of shoemakers.
Trinket.
They exist in various shapes, but are quite similar to the half moon knife that we know of leatherworkers today. See if I can find pictures.
Just make sure that you can share screen. I think I've allowed it so that you can. If you cannot, let me know and I will.
So one of the clearest sets of depictions that we have from them is from the Mendel Hausbuch. Oh no, I can't share my screen, but that's right.
Let me just fiddle with my settings and see if I can allow you to do that.
Okay. They're fairly similar to modern what are called head knives that leatherworkers use, which is sort of a half moon shaped blade. But unlike modern knives that sort of have a half moon and a handle sticking straight up, their handles are different. This is going to be, edit this bit out. I'm going to go and get mine.
I have changed the setting. You should be able to host to share your screen now.
Ah, cool. Right. That one. Does that make sense, or have you got weird settings pages now?
Now I can see a screen. I can't just see the image. There we go. Yep.
Okay, so that is I believe, 15th century shoemaker from the Mendel Hausbuch. And the thing that he has in his hand is a trenket. And it has this curved blade, and you can see the sort of T-shaped handle with a big spike out the front. And that is what they look like. And they, in art, they pretty much all look something like that. The best collection of pictures of them is actually on Mark Carlson's page, but it's offline at the moment. So that's what a trenket looks like. There are some extant ones. This is a modern leatherworkers head knife, half round knife, half moon knife, whatever people call it. This one is probably very early 20th century. It's been sharpened a lot, so it's a bit of a funny shape. And this is a reproduction trinket that I have that was made by a smith in New Zealand. It's not quite right. It's probably a third again bigger than the thing it was copied from. But the basic elements of it are, you have a handle, you have a spike, you have a curved blade, and this is based on one from the Museum of London. In art, they're often a lot more curved. I suspect that the one from the Museum of London was like that at one point and has just been sharpened down to nothing, because it's probably yay big, I think. But if you imagine some sort of hybrid of that, then you get the idea. There's a lot of speculation about what the spike is for. You often see these stuck into the bench by the spike. As far as anybody knows, it's just a marking tool. When you're marking a pattern, having the tool that you can use to scribe and then just change your grip and cut out with is a reasonably efficient workflow. So yeah, that's what they look like, or what one example of them looks like, and they are the master's tool. The master of the shop was responsible for pattern cutting. And there is a shoemaker's testament from, I think, the 15th century, set to rhyme, where he leaves his various tools to people, and he leaves his trinket and his cutting board to his wife, which implies that she's actually inheriting the shop.
Yeah,
because these are the master's tools for the shop. And yeah, they are completely emblematic of shoemakers. They don't appear on the arms of the Cordwainers Guild because they have goat's heads on the London Cordwainers Guild has goat's heads on its arms, because Cordovan leather was goat leather in period, and it was that really defined the high-end shoemakers. But if you see a picture of a medieval person with a knife that looks like this, or looks like the one I screen shared, they are a shoemaker. And there are very similar knives in Roman art, different handle arrangement, but the same kind of blade. And in the couple of pictures we have of Egyptian shoemakers. There's another kind of knife that you see which looks kind of like this, and it's sharp on the inside edge, and it's a trimming knife for particularly in later period, where you've got a welt that needs trimming. You have a separate knife for doing that. But there's not a lot of tools involved in making shoes, which is possibly why the knife became so iconic. The chap I shared also has a big pair of shears, which you see in medieval art occasionally with shoemakers. The uppers leather that they were using was thin, and you could cut it with a decent pair of shears. Mostly it would have been cut with a knife. The sole leather certainly would have been cut with a knife.
Yeah. Cool. I've learned a thing or 10.
Hurrah.
Does anybody else have any further questions, or are they too captivated by the talk of trinkets? Otherwise, we'll be out of questions. We'll have to end.
What do you find is the most, other than the one we all share about people who can't get a pair of decent shoes to save their lives, what's the most frustrating thing you see reenactors doing with leather that you wish you could change?
Probably not understanding that leather is not a definition of a material, and that what leather was like in medieval, in fact pre-industrial leather, was a very different material than even modern veg tan leather. You know, we think of, you know, they were doing vegetable tanning, and therefore modern veggie tan leather is like what they used, and it's absolutely nothing like what they used. Characteristically, it's a similar but very different in some important ways material, and the kind of leathers that were used were, you know, everything we get is cow. And if you need thinner leather, you get cow, and you shove it through a machine that shaves it down into thinner cow. Those are industrial machines that didn't exist in pre-modern times. So if you needed thinner leather, you used calf or sheep or goat. Yeah, it's a complicated subject, but a lot of what reenactors end up doing with leather is a little bit like if costumers went, wool is a period material, so I'll use it for all my underwear. You know,
no leather undergarments?
It's fabric, right? You know, they made clothes out of fabric, so, you know, but it's getting better. You know, and it's expensive, and shoes are hard. You know, you need, it takes a reasonable amount of dedication and money to get good shoes. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has access to that. So, yeah.
That's a good follow-up question. What do you consider to be a good price for the reenactors on the call who maybe don't have good shoes yet? What would you consider a good entry-level price for shoes that someone like yourself isn't going to immediately sneer at? Using you as a reasonable watermark for an understanding of shoes.
I'm not actually sure because I haven't looked, but probably a couple of $100 New Zealand
Yeah,
is what you're looking at to get a fairly basic pair of Indian, Pakistani made shoes. The bad ones of which are absolutely awful, and the you know, the better ones of which are quite possible. I mean, that's part of the reason I started looking at glued up machine made shoes, is because I can do it better than that for less money. But now I live in a tiny 1-bedroom flat with a minuscule garage, and I just haven't got space.
As an example, just what there is, for example, one of the Penzak shoemakers has a pair of turn shoes for 145 US. So that, if I do the sums, I'm not sure how much that would be in New Zealand without Googling it.
Is that Beaumont, Catherine?
No, that's Armland.
Yeah, no.
116 currently. Yeah. And then, of course, there's postage.
Yeah. And if you want things that are actually made properly, you're probably looking at someone in Europe at that point, and you're looking at prices starting at 300 euros. For something really good, you're probably looking at 500 or 600 euros for shoes. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good that could be done at the lower end of that to make things more accessible to people. And if I can excavate the right machine and the right bits of stuff in my garage at some point, then that's something that I'll try and get people interested in again.
Shoemaking collective.
Yeah, I mean, making them fit is still the hard part.
Yeah.
If you can make them, construct them easily, then you still have to go through the patterning process and so on, and that's a fair amount of work.
Well, any further questions, follow-ons, anything like that? Anybody else have any questions? Going once, going twice.
Well, those of you who are local know where to find me.
Yes. Yeah, so basically, what should we say for those, well, those who are not local, contact Darton, perhaps. Or if they're in New Zealand, you'll see when we have events again on the regular, without having to hermit because of pandemics. Yeah.
I mean, for those who aren't local who might be watching this, I can be reached via email on william@wherearetheelves.net. One word. The website doesn't exist anymore, but the email still works.
One of the reasons I decided I wanted to do this series of artisanal chats is so that local, perhaps people particularly in the Shire of Darton and maybe the Hamlet of Shearwater too, if they are in, so that they can become aware of the knowledge that is accessible within the Shire. I mean, I've been a member for, this will be my fifth year, I think. And I know I'm only scratching the surface as to what people know. So I'm hoping that this will, if someone is interested in shoes or wants a pair of shoes but doesn't know where to begin, then they can know that Master William de Wyke Laurel knows things. He may not be able to do them himself, but he can tell you how to do them.
Yeah.
If you're willing to go through a little bit of trial and error and fitting of things, then
yeah, absolutely.
This knowledge is available.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of the people on the call at the moment, either I've bent your ear already, or you've got shoes, or you know as much as you're interested in. But for people who aren't and who want shoes or who are interested in more, then yeah, absolutely, come find me.
Find you, absolutely, at william@wherearetheelves.net. Very good. All right. And you've got that in the chat. I'll have to save that and post things in various places when this video is done. I will say thank you very, 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 very much for being our inaugural artisan.
It was fun.
Very fun.
Thank you all for coming and asking questions.
All right, I will stop the recording and then we can have some pleasant chat before I save things and then have to do editing. All right, where's that button gone?